Unaware his wife was pregnant with triplets and had just inherited $100 million, Ethan signed the divorce papers with a smile, believing he was finally free from the barren woman who could never give him an heir. To him, Grace was a closed chapter, a quiet, fragile wife who spent years praying for children that never came. But as he slipped a diamond ring on his mistress's finger, he had no idea that Grace, the woman he discarded like dust, was carrying not one, but 3 lives with his name written in their blood. Nor did he know that the fortune she silently inherited the same week he left would make her wealthier than the entire empire he'd sacrificed her for. But what happens when the man who divorced his barren wife discovers she wasn't barren at all? When the woman he abandoned rises with 3 children and $100 million behind her name? And what will Ethan do when he realizes Grace's next move isn't forgiveness, but something far more shocking? Grace Carter once believed in forever. Her marriage to Ethan was supposed to be the dream, the fairy tale built on love, laughter, and late-night promises, whispered over coffee and shared ambitions. But marriage had turned her into a ghost, one who cooked his meals, smiled through his moods, and blamed herself each month when the pregnancy test came back negative. The doctors said it was stress-related. Ethan said it was her fault. The word barren had become her shadow, echoing through every silence between them. The night he left, she didn't cry. She just stood by the window, her hand resting subconsciously on the small curve of her belly, unaware yet that 3 hearts already beat within her. The storm outside mirrored the one building in her chest. Lightning flashed, illuminating the divorce papers on the table, his ring beside them like a mockery of everything they once promised. Ethan had already moved on to Olivia Grant, the woman he said understood him. Grace remembered Olivia's smile, sharp, smug, and certain. Weeks later, when the doctor told her she was pregnant, Grace sat in stunned silence. The world blurred, sound disappeared, and for the first time in years, her tears weren't from pain. They were from disbelief. She had life within her. 3 lives. Triplets. The word alone felt like both a miracle and a secret weapon, but she said nothing. The man who had humiliated her didn't deserve to know the gift he threw away. When her father died shortly after, grief tangled with the fragile joy growing inside her. At the reading of the will, she sat quietly at the long mahogany table, surrounded by lawyers and relatives whispering about her failed marriage. But when her name was called, "To my daughter, Grace Carter, I leave my controlling shares and assets of Wellington Holdings, estimated at $100 million. The room fell silent. Her fingers trembled as she signed the inheritance papers, and in that moment, something inside her shifted. She was no longer the woman begging for love. She was a woman with power, wealth, and a reason to fight back. 6 months later, the world knew her as Emily Hale. The change wasn't sudden. It was strategic. She'd taken her mother's maiden name, moved to the city, and quietly invested her inheritance under Wellington Holdings' umbrella. No one connected her to the former barren wife Ethan had discarded. To them, she was an elegant investor with a sharp mind and colder poise. Her children would be born into protection, not pity. Now, standing beneath the glittering chandeliers of the Wellington Charity Gala, Emily Hale looked like perfection itself. Her gown, a midnight silk that shimmered with each movement, hugged the body of a woman reborn. At her side stood Jonathan Hale, her husband, the powerful billionaire who had once been her business partner, and later, her calculated choice for marriage. He wasn't Ethan, but he was cut from the same dangerous fabric, charming, ruthless, and arrogant enough to think he owned her. Jonathan leaned close, whispering through his fixed smile, "Smile, Emily. Don't embarrass me tonight." Her lips curved, but her eyes didn't. Around them, cameras flashed like fireflies. Laughter rippled through the ballroom, champagne flowed, and at the center of it all, wealth danced in polished shoes and practiced grins. Emily felt the room shift when Olivia Grant entered, a fiery red dress clinging to her like sin itself. The same woman who once stole her husband now glided toward her new one, and the irony wasn't lost on her. Jonathan's arm tensed. His gaze followed Olivia, hunger undisguised. The whispers began almost instantly. "That's the one," Jonathan's rumored mistress. Emily felt their stares, their pity, their silent gossip slicing through the air. She didn't flinch. Then Olivia approached, her smile dripping with mock sweetness. "Oh, Emily, I adore your dress," she said, lifting her glass. "Though perhaps it could use a little color." And with deliberate grace, she tilted her glass just enough. Red wine cascaded down Emily's gown like spilled blood. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Jonathan's laughter followed, cruel and sharp. Pathetic, he sneered loud enough for everyone to hear. Can't even handle a little accident. The room erupted in nervous laughter. Cameras clicked. Emily stood drenched, humiliated, her gown ruined, but her posture never broke. She looked at them all, her husband, his mistress, the gawking faces, and then simply turned and walked away, her silence slicing deeper than any outburst could. In the marble restroom, she stared at her reflection, wiping at the crimson stains. The laughter from the ballroom echoed faintly through the walls. Her reflection didn't look weak. It looked dangerous. Her voice came out soft, steady, a whisper that felt like a promise. You think I'm powerless? You have no idea. Behind her, the red stain on her dress looked almost deliberate, like a mark of vengeance waiting to be written. And that night, as the gala lights faded and the laughter died, Emily Hale, the woman once known as Grace Carter, stopped being a victim. The storm was back, but this time, she was the one calling the lightning. Morning sunlight streamed through the tall windows of the Hale mansion, soft and golden, almost cruel in its calm. The same house that had echoed with Jonathan's laughter last night now sat hollow, tainted by the memory of whispered mockery and red wine stains. Emily sat at the kitchen counter, scrolling through her phone, every headline cut like glass. Jonathan Hale and Olivia Grant steal spotlight at Wellington Gala. Mrs. Hale's awkward breakdown, a social disaster. Power couple or public scandal? The Hales and the mistress in red. Each article replayed her humiliation in sharp, unforgiving detail. There was even a video clip, Olivia's smirk, Jonathan's cruel laugh, Emily's silence. She forced herself to watch it once, not to torture herself, but to remember every face that laughed. Pain was her fuel now. The phone buzzed. It was Rachel Moore, her cousin and only remaining link to the past. Emily, Rachel began, her voice cautious. I saw the news. Are you okay? Emily stared out the window at the sprawling gardens Jonathan loved to brag about, but never cared to maintain. I'm fine, she said simply. You don't sound fine. Everyone's talking, Em. Maybe it's time to just walk away. He's moved on, obviously. Don't drag this out. A slow breath escaped her. Rachel meant well, but the words stung. He's moved on. That phrase had haunted her twice now. Once when Ethan left her for Olivia, and again as Jonathan flaunted her before the same woman. The irony was almost poetic. Thanks, Rachel, Emily said, her tone measured. But I'm not done yet. She ended the call, her reflection glinting faintly in the glass door. Not done. Not by far. That evening, Jonathan returned home in high spirits, the smell of expensive cologne preceding him. Olivia was with him again, dressed casually in one of his shirts, her perfume trailing behind like arrogance in bloom. Jonathan threw his jacket onto the couch. Emily, he said with mock cheerfulness. Good news. The board meeting went well. The contract's almost sealed. $8.4 billion, sweetheart. Olivia laughed softly, looping her arm through his. And after that, you'll finally be free to live your best life, John. No more pretending. Emily looked up from the dining table where she sat, her expression calm. Pretending, she repeated softly. Jonathan smirked. Let's not play dumb. Once this deal closes, I'll file for divorce. You'll get a generous settlement, of course. I'm not heartless. Olivia giggled, brushing his arm. You're too kind. Emily's lips twitched faintly, not quite a smile. How thoughtful of you, she murmured. Jonathan poured himself a drink. Come on, Em. You should be happy. You'll finally be free of me. And maybe you can take up painting again, or whatever it is women like you do when they're alone. Without me, you're nothing. But at least you'll be comfortable. The words hung in the air, echoing like the snap of a whip. Then he left, arm in arm with Olivia, laughing as the door closed behind them. Emily sat in the silence that followed, the ticking of the grandfather clock growing louder, heavier, until she couldn't ignore it. Her gaze drifted to the small wooden chest on the side table, the one that had belonged to her late father. For months she hadn't opened it. Now, almost without thought, she did. Inside were old files, yellowed papers, and contracts tied with faded red string. She began sifting through them, scanning her father's signature, the precise loops and steady lines she remembered from childhood. But then she froze. Her own name appeared, Grace Carter Hale, on a series of legal documents tied to Jonathan's companies, contracts she'd never signed, agreements that transferred control of assets, patents, and shares, all tied to Wellington Holdings, her inheritance. She flipped through each page, her pulse quickening. The signatures looked real. But they weren't hers. They were copies forged to perfection. Every deal Jonathan had made, every empire he'd built, every acquisition he'd bragged about, it all rested on forged authorization from her name. For a long moment, she couldn't breathe. Then slowly the realization settled like steel. He built his empire on stolen authority. Emily's hands trembled as she spread the papers across the table. The red stains from last night's dress still marked the fabric of the chair behind her, a ghostly reminder of humiliation. But now as she traced each forged line, her fear began to melt into something sharper. Purpose. The lamp cast a golden pool of light across the documents. Her eyes moved from one to another, mapping out the empire her father once warned her about. "Trust no one with power over your name," he had said. She finally understood what he meant. When dawn broke, Emily was still there, her hair falling loosely around her face, eyes rimmed with exhaustion, but burning with focus. Every piece was falling into place. The same world that mocked her for being powerless was about to see what silence could do. By sunrise, she had already called Mr. Whitaker, her father's old attorney. "I need to see you today," she said. "It's urgent." At the office, the elderly lawyer adjusted his glasses as she laid the forged contracts before him. His brows furrowed deeper with each page. "This," he muttered, "this is criminal, Emily. Every major deal Jonathan Hale made depends on your signature. If this comes to light, the board will freeze everything." "I don't want sympathy," Emily said, her tone even. "I want proof, legal proof." He nodded gravely. "You'll have it." That afternoon, she reached out to Ethan Brooks, her old friend from college, now a financial analyst buried deep inside Hale Enterprises. He was cautious at first, but when she showed him the evidence, his voice trembled. "Emily, do you realize what this means?" His entire empire could collapse. "That's the idea," she said quietly. Over the next few weeks, they worked in silence. Late nights, encrypted calls, shared files passed hand to hand. With every discovery, shell accounts, offshore laundering, fake charities, Emily's web grew wider. She began contacting those Jonathan had stepped on during his rise. Fired assistants, silenced executives, broken partners. They remembered. They still bled. And one by one, they agreed to help her. By the time the first whispers of corporate irregularities began surfacing in the media, Emily already had everything she needed. At breakfast one morning, Jonathan sat across from her, arrogance unshaken. "You're quiet lately," he said between bites. "Planning your next charity appearance? Try not to spill anything this time." Olivia laughed from his side of the table. Emily smiled faintly, sipping her tea. "Don't worry," she said softly. "Next time, no one will be laughing." He didn't notice the way her eyes glinted then, or the calm confidence in her tone. He didn't see that the woman he mocked had already begun writing his downfall. And when he looked at her that morning, Jonathan still saw what he wanted to see, a silent, broken wife. But the truth was far more dangerous. The morning of the signing arrived draped in quiet tension. Even the city outside seemed to hold its breath. From her penthouse window, Emily watched the skyline glisten under an amber sunrise, the glass towers catching fire with light. Somewhere inside one of those towers, her husband, Jonathan Hale, was preparing to close his $8.4 billion deal, the one that would make him untouchable. He didn't know the documents sitting on his desk were about to burn everything he'd ever built. Emily fastened her earrings with steady hands, her reflection in the mirror composed, immaculate. Her black suit was simple but commanding, tailored to perfection. Power didn't need glitter. It needed silence and precision. On her wrist gleamed a watch her father had given her years ago, the one engraved with his words, "Never let them take your name." By the time she stepped into the elevator, her phone buzzed. It was Ethan Brooks. "It's all verified," he said. "Every signature, every offshore account, everything leads straight to him. Once you present this, the board can't look away." "Good," she replied. "Once it starts, there's no turning back." "You sure you're ready for that?" Emily's lips curved faintly. "I've been ready since the night he laughed." At Hale Enterprises headquarters, the atmosphere was electric. Security guards lined the marble lobby. Photographers lingered outside, and media crews gathered in anticipation of Jonathan Hale's monumental signing. It was supposed to be his crowning moment, the day the empire expanded across continents. Inside the top-floor boardroom, Jonathan stood tall in a charcoal suit, every inch the charming mogul. Olivia sat near him, radiant and smug, her red lips curling with satisfaction. Around the vast table sat investors, board members, and legal teams, pens poised, smiles polished. "Ladies and gentlemen," Jonathan began, voice dripping with confidence, "today marks the next chapter in Hale Enterprises history, A merger that will redefine global infrastructure. Together we'll build. The doors opened. Every head turned. Emily stepped inside. Calm, graceful, uninvited. For a moment no one spoke. Her heels clicked against the marble floor, each step measured, echoing in the stillness. Jonathan's smile faltered. Emily, he said slowly, masking irritation with a strained charm. You weren't expected. I know, she said evenly, placing a sealed envelope on the table. But you'll want to see this before you sign anything. Olivia rolled her eyes. Really, Emily? You're crashing business meetings now? How desperate? Emily ignored her completely. Her gaze stayed on Jonathan. Go ahead, she said softly. Open it. He hesitated, then tore the seal open. The room fell silent as his eyes skimmed the documents. Pages of contracts, forged signatures, and financial transfers. The color drained from his face. What the hell is this? Evidence, she replied, her tone calm, of every forgery, every stolen authorization, every illegal deal you made under my name. Murmurs rippled through the room. One of the investors leaned forward. Forged authorization? Is that true, Jonathan? He snapped. Of course not. She's lying. This is nonsense. But Emily was already one step ahead. She tapped her phone, projecting a screen onto the digital board behind her. Side by side appeared two sets of signatures, hers and the ones on Jonathan's documents. The forgeries were flawless but not perfect. Subtle inconsistencies, identical ink patterns, overlapping timestamps, all highlighted, all verified by a third-party forensic analyst. Every transaction tied to Wellington Holdings was executed using my name without my consent, she continued, which means every deal you've made under those authorizations is legally void. If this signing proceeds today, it constitutes further fraud on a global scale. The investors exchanged uneasy glances. The air thickened. Olivia's smirk began to falter. Jonathan's voice rose, desperate. You think anyone's going to believe you? You're just bitter, jealous because you couldn't handle your place. You're nothing without me. Emily's gaze stayed steady. Without you, Jonathan, she said quietly, I am finally myself. Then she turned to the board. Proceed with this signing, and I'll have no choice but to forward these documents to the SEC, the Department of Justice, and every major shareholder on record. Or you can halt this now, conduct a forensic review, and save what's left of your reputations. The room exploded with murmurs. Investors whispered rapidly among themselves. Someone stood and demanded a recess. The chairman, a stoic man named Carlyle, finally spoke, his voice cutting through the chaos. Until this matter is clarified, this deal is suspended, effective immediately. Jonathan slammed his hand against the table. You can't do this. I've built this company from the ground up. Emily's voice was ice. On my father's foundation, on my inheritance, on my name. He rounded on her, eyes burning. You think you can destroy me? No, she said softly. You already did that yourself. As security moved in to escort Emily out, at Jonathan's furious command, she didn't resist. She turned once at the door, her calm gaze sweeping the chaos behind her. Papers scattered, voices clashed, Olivia shouted something about damage control. The empire that once humiliated her was crumbling in real time. Outside, as she stepped into the hallway, Ethan was waiting. How did it go? She exhaled slowly, her composure unbroken. The first crack's made, she said. Now we let the rest fall. Within hours, the headlines began to shift. Anonymous leaks of corporate fraud flooded the media. Investors withdrew. Auditors demanded records. Olivia, terrified, vanished from sight. That evening, Emily stood on her balcony, the city lights flickering, like 1,000 eyes watching. The same skyline Jonathan once ruled now seemed smaller, almost fragile. She could almost hear his voice somewhere far away, yelling, denying, begging someone to listen. The wind brushed her hair across her face. Below, cameras were already gathering. The world was watching the mighty Jonathan Hale fall. And for the first time, Emily smiled. Not out of revenge, but release. The chains were gone. The silence had finally spoken. Jonathan Hale's empire didn't crumble overnight. It imploded piece by piece, like glass under pressure. Within 48 hours of the aborted signing, news networks across the country carried the story. Hale Enterprises under federal investigation. CEO accused of corporate fraud. Board members resigned. Partners withdrew. The $8.4 billion deal that was supposed to crown Jonathan's reign had become the anchor dragging him down. Olivia Grant was the first to abandon ship. When the subpoenas arrived, She walked into a private meeting with investigators, her eyes swollen from tears, her loyalty dissolving under fear. She told them everything: the offshore accounts, the bribed auditors, the secret foundations where Jonathan funneled stolen funds. She even handed over the digital keys he thought only he possessed. By the time Jonathan found out, it was too late. His empire was frozen, his name plastered across headlines as a fraud. He tried to call Olivia, but her number had been disconnected. He tried to reach the board, but his access was revoked. Even his most loyal aides had vanished. The man who once commanded entire rooms now sat alone in the mansion's vast study, the same place he once mocked his wife from. Empty liquor bottles lined the desk. His reflection in the window looked foreign, tired, unshaven, broken. Outside, reporters swarmed the gates, their shouts cutting through the night. "Mr. Hale, do you have a comment on the allegations? Is it true your wife exposed your fraud? Where's Olivia Grant?" Each question hit like a stone. Jonathan turned from the window and stumbled to the couch, head in his hands. How did it all fall apart so fast? He thought of Emily's face in that boardroom. Calm, controlled, untouchable. There had been something terrifying in her silence, something he hadn't seen before. For years he thought her weakness was compliance. Now he understood it had been calculation. Somewhere deep down, he almost admired it. Almost. Days passed in chaos. Hale Enterprises was officially suspended under investigation, its stock value plummeting. Creditors called in debts, banks froze accounts, and former partners scrambled to protect themselves. The empire Jonathan once boasted would outlast him had dissolved into dust. And through it all, Emily never said a word publicly. She didn't gloat, didn't appear on television, didn't issue statements. Her silence became its own kind of thunder. The media painted her as the mysterious widow who brought down a billionaire. And in a way, that wasn't far from the truth. When she finally agreed to a private meeting with the board, now under emergency restructuring, the atmosphere was reverent. Men who once overlooked her now stood as if in the presence of someone they should never have underestimated. Mr. Carlyle, the chairman who had suspended the signing, stood to greet her. "Mrs. Hale," he said formally, "on behalf of the board, we owe you an apology, and perhaps more than that. It appears your father's assets were fraudulently seized under Jonathan's direction. As of this morning, they've been reinstated to your ownership." Emily nodded once, her expression steady. "Thank you. My father built Wellington Holdings on integrity. I intend to restore it to what it was meant to be." There was a pause, then Carlyle said quietly, "The public will want a statement." She smiled faintly. "They'll have one soon. Not from me, from the results." When she left the building, reporters surged forward, cameras flashing. She didn't stop or speak. The only sound was the clicking of her heels, sharp, deliberate, echoing against the marble floor like punctuation to a story only she fully understood. That evening, Jonathan appeared at the gates of the mansion he no longer owned. Rain poured, soaking his suit, plastering his hair against his forehead. His once commanding voice had become a rasp. "Emily!" he shouted, clutching the iron bars. "Please, just talk to me." From the upstairs window, Emily stood motionless, watching him through the rain. He looked small, drenched, stripped of everything but regret. Cameras flashed from the road as reporters recorded every pitiful word. "Emily, I'm sorry," he cried. I lost everything. You have to help me. Please, you're the only one who can fix this." Her gaze didn't waver. The woman he once humiliated at the gala, the one he called pathetic, worthless, now stood untouchable. The tables had turned completely. Jonathan fell to his knees in the mud, his voice breaking. "You ruined me," he whispered. She didn't open the window. She didn't raise her voice. She simply said, soft enough that only she could hear herself, "No, Jonathan, you ruined yourself." Then with quiet precision, she repeated his old words, the ones that had haunted her. Pathetic, worthless. She closed the curtain slowly, shutting out his image, his voice, and everything he once represented. Inside, the mansion felt different now. Her children's laughter echoed faintly down the hallway. 3 bright voices, full of life. Triplets, born out of the love she was told she'd never have. They didn't know the wars their mother had fought, the storms she'd endured, or the legacy she'd reclaimed. In the study that had once been Jonathan's, Emily now sat behind her father's restored desk. The Wellington crest shone on the wall behind her, no longer stolen, no longer silenced. Her posture was calm, her expression serene. On the desk lay an old photo of her father and herself, smiling on a sunny day, long before betrayal entered her world. The board had asked her to resume leadership of Wellington Holdings. She accepted. Under her name, the company began anew. Ethical, visionary, unstoppable. Investors who once bowed to Jonathan now sought her counsel. In the business magazines that followed, the headlines told a different story this time. From humiliation to power, Emily Hale reclaims her legacy. The Silent Storm, how a woman turned betrayal into empire. But Emily didn't read them. She didn't need validation. Power, she'd learned, wasn't about revenge. It was about control. And she finally had it. Late one night, as the city lights flickered outside her window, she caught her reflection in the tall mirror. The same mirror she once stared into. Covered in red wine, whispering that she wasn't powerless. Now that reflection stared back unflinching, confident, strong, unstoppable. She smiled faintly. The storm had passed, but its echo remained in her eyes. She turned away from the mirror, walking toward her children's laughter, toward the life she had rebuilt. Not out of anger, but resilience. Behind her, the mirror caught the faintest shimmer of light from the chandelier, as if the universe itself bowed in quiet acknowledgement. The woman once mocked as barren, humiliated as worthless, had rewritten her story. Not through fury, but through silence, strategy, and strength. And in that silence, Emily Hale became history. Tomorrow would bring more chaos, more revelations, more reckoning. But tonight, for just a moment, she allowed herself to breathe. She had turned humiliation into history, and the storm was still far from over.